This is The Crossover.
All right, Crossover NBA podcast. Chris Mannix and Howard Beck. Happy 1 month until the trade deadline day. Howard, we're closing in on one of the seminal moments of the NBA season. Can you believe we're already halfway through it right now?
I can't believe we're actually halfway through it. I hope seminal moment is appropriate for this coming trade deadline, because it feels like we've been waiting, I don't know, a decade for a Ben Simmons deal, or I don't know. I guess we're not waiting for a Dame Lillard deal anymore because he's on the shelf again. But Ben Simmons at a minimum. That resolution, I think everybody in the league is hoping for at this stage. And, you know, I'm always intrigued by the surprises, right? Because we will sit here and we will fixate like crazy on the big names and certain guys who have been rumored for months. And then it's the surprise deal that sometimes dominates trade deadline. So we'll see. I have a feeling this is going to be one of those years. Something that we just did not see coming is going to be the one that we end up talking about on February 11th.
Yeah, I want to dive into some of those possibilities, talk a little bit about Ben Simmons, talk a little bit about the Atlanta Hawks, talk about the Celtics. A lot of attention being paid to the Jayson, Tatum, Jaylen Brown dynamic. But I want to begin, Howard, with the events of Sunday. Klay Thomson, after 941 days on the shelf due to multiple injuries, he was back in the Golden State lineup. But I got to tell you, I was pretty amazed at what I saw. Like, I knew Klay would be able to bring certain things to the table. Like the shot, I figured was going to be there because he'd spent so much time over the last couple of years just only being able to shoot. So I figured he'd be sharp in that aspect of the game. But as I'm watching that game kind of play out on Sunday night, I'm watching a guy cross over Jared Allen on the perimeter and dunk over two Cavs defenders. I'm watching a guy go to the basket and pivot off or push off that right foot, which was the one that was that had the Achilles tear, and yeah, it looked pretty good, you know, pivoting off it. I'm watching a guy play pretty sturdy defense against, you know, guys of different sizes in that Cavaliers lineup. So that was about as impressive as a debut could be, at least in my mind. What did you think of Klay's debut? And to kind of push it forward, does that change your opinion at all about the ceiling for this Warriors team?
Can we just talk about that number you threw out at the beginning? What was it? 941?
941.
That sounds made up. Like if you had just said, I don't know, he's been out for, let's say, 940, because it just sounds like a huge number. It's a huge number.
Yeah.
Like it's insane that he could have been out as long as he has been. And look, we know it was two of the most devastating injuries too. And so, you know, it would be right to tamp down expectations, as I think Steve Kerr had for weeks leading up to the comeback. Like, guys, don't expect you're going to see, you know, we're not going to put a ton on him right away. We're going to curtail his minutes, all that. They certainly played him more than they, I think, had planned to. And I think he performed at a level higher than they planned. I mean, Klay himself basically said he hadn't dunked in I don't know how long. Like, he was not dunking in practice. This was not something he was really pushing. But the moment just kind of carried him. The enthusiasm, the momentum of the moment, the adrenaline. And that to me, like, I think for everybody in that building, everybody, all of us watching from home, of which there were millions and millions, because it ended up being the highest watched NBA TV game since like 2016. That was the moment where you thought, wow, like you could just really feel happy for him and be impressed by how far he's come. Because like you said, you figured the shot will be there, and the shot really actually was not great. When it went in, it looked like Klay. When it didn't go in, you thought, I can't believe it didn't go in. But like that'll come, like, you know, the timing and some of just, you know, getting his win back and all that. But I mean, look, we're recording this hours before he plays game 2 of the comeback. But game 1, I think, was everything they could have possibly hoped for, even including Klay blocking Lauri Markkanen's to remind us a little bit too that, hey, Klay Thompson was known quite a bit for his defense too before the injuries. So, I mean, great all the way around. You saw everybody, the whole league was celebrating on Twitter because Klay is absolutely beloved. Like, if you don't like Klay, there's something wrong with you. I don't. It's funny when you ask, like, does it change the calculus of how we figure or how we, assess the Warriors and their title hopes? Like, they were already there, right? Like, that he can put them that much further along, that he can give them that much more depth, that now Jordan Poole gets to become this sixth man for them and potentially a sixth man of the year candidate if he logs enough games off the bench. It's only a plus. And look, could there be setbacks? Sure. Was Steph kind of running on fumes a little bit in recent weeks? Like, there were some warning signs, and but those are just the rhythms of a season, especially for a team that expects to go deep. They were there. They were in the conversation before Klay came back. Klay being at this level and assuming that he only just gets better from here. Yeah, I think maybe we're talking about the Warriors as favorites potentially. And I will still say, just to put a pin in it, James Wiseman's out there somewhere too. And when he comes back, that fortifies the front court as well.
All right, you're putting a lot of faith in James Wiseman having an impact, which down the line, I think he probably will, but maybe not year two of his young career. Before Klay came back, I had the Warriors in that top tier. And that top tier included Phoenix. In my mind, it included Utah. In the Eastern Conference, it was Brooklyn and it was Milwaukee at the top. I didn't have Chicago. They have a great record, but I need to see more from Chicago to put them in that same class. After seeing Klay, and I'm sitting there, Howard, and I'm watching and I'm thinking about this. I'm trying not to be a prisoner of the moment. I almost got to create a new tier. Like, I would put Golden State above everybody else right now.
Everybody
in the
else.
NBA. Everybody else in the NBA. Because, and again, I'm kind of spinning it forward a little bit. I think that over the next 3 months, because it's a long time, you get half a season for Klay to get his legs back under him, for Klay to shake off any of the rust that's existed after nearly 3 years off. He is going to be, I used to wonder, like, would he be like 75% of his former self? I think by the playoffs, he could be like 85, 90% of his former self. And that is still a great player, one of the best shooters in the NBA, good defensive player. And when you're talking about Steve Kerr's system, it functions so much better when it's Steph and Klay. Like, Steph is still remarkable and can do creative things on his own, but that is a system designed for two guards kind of running around the perimeter playing catch and shoot. And without Klay, I think that took something of a hit. Now that he's back, it's going to be even better. He's going to make their defense solid. And you couple that with the fact that Steph is still playing at MVP level. Yes, he's had some rough patches over the last few weeks, but who has? A long season. I don't think that's indicative of anything we're going to see from Steph down the line. Draymond is in the mix for Defensive Player of the Year this season. The young guys, they might be able to add something, maybe not high level stuff, but as the season goes on, the return of Wiseman, the other young guys on that bench, they might be able to add some. I think this team, and I've been mentioned, Andrew Wiggins. Like, Andrew Wiggins has been great all season long. He has been, as good as Harrison Barnes was back in those days when he was on Golden State, maybe even better. I'm just saying, like, you can make, in a weird way, you can make an argument that this version of the Warriors, when the playoffs roll around, will be a stronger version than the team that won 72 games. Like, 73 games, sorry. Just because of all those things that I mentioned, that, Wiggins over Barnes, Thompson coming back, Draymond playing at a high level. It's probably close. I'm not saying it's a big gap or at all, but like, if you call the Durant Warriors the best version of this Golden State era, and I would agree with that. I would say that to be true. This one has the potential to be as good as those early Golden State years.
Yeah, listen, the only hesitation I have in seconding that one, Chris, because I think there's potential for it, but that was obviously a younger Steph, a younger Klay, a younger Draymond, a younger Iguodala, Sean Livingston, and that really, just really well orchestrated supporting cast of a lot of guys who were just veterans and knew their roles and played them to the hilt. And this is an older version when we talk about their stars, and a younger version, I think, to a degree, when we talk about the supporting cast, because now it's Wiggins and Poole. And and maybe Weissman eventually. But they do play brilliantly together. I'm glad you mentioned just the ripple effect here, though, because I want to talk about that for a second. Steph comes off or starts off the season just on fire, and he runs out to the lead of our fictional MVP race. Fictional because MVP races in November, December are purely for conversational purposes. But it was he's legitimately there, right? The stats are there, the record is there. He's been great. He starts to struggle with his shot a little. His field goal percentage dips. People start wondering, is something wrong with Steph and all this other stuff. I said this at the time, the week that he broke Ray Allen's record. He would have broken it 3 games sooner if Klay had been playing. Because what's happening is Steph is having to create so much more space for himself, I think, and create more period and carry that much bigger of a load. His usage rate right now is at 32.6. So let's discount last year when Klay wasn't there and discount the year before when Steph only played 5 games, also without Klay. But before that, it was 30, 31, 30. He hasn't been this high of a usage rate since the 2015-16 season. And granted, that was with a lot of help around him. But in general, especially as you're getting older, I don't think you necessarily want Steph carrying as big of a load as he's been carrying for the Warriors this year. So having Klay back means Klay's gravity now helps Steph. He doesn't maybe have to work as hard to get open shots. He doesn't have to score as much or shoot as much, period. I just think that this is a huge relief. And then, what you talked about as well, having the two of them together in tandem because of Kerr's system, and also just having another guy who knows, how to play off Steph at a really high level. So between, Klay and Draymond, getting that trio back together, that's the core of this team's chemistry. And, how Klay will hold up defensively, I mentioned that the block of Markkanen was a really nice moment. But Klay always prided himself on taking on the toughest perimeter assignments and sparing Steph a lot of that. Wiggins has been able to do a lot of that and at a great level. So that's the luxury here too. Okay, granted, they do not have Kevin Durant anymore, but Klay's coming back to a team with an Andrew Wiggins who's shooting 42% nearly from 3.
That's wild. The 42% number is
yes.
He's averaging 19 points a game and shooting 42% from 3.
And defending his ass off.
And defending. Which takes a lot of pressure off Klay. Klay, yes. He was guarding Markkanen a lot in that game.
Yes.
So it's you don't have to have him running around chasing the best 2 guard that's out there. Klay's sturdy enough that he can defend someone that size.
I mean, look, this is such a luxury. I mean, it's an amazing thing to talk about too, because we never talked about Wiggins as this great of an asset because in Minnesota, maybe miscast as a number 1, all that other stuff. But this version of Wiggins is a huge luxury for the Warriors. This deal that was looked at the time is just, it's opportunistic. They made a play for D'Angelo Russell, and that was just a way to get a trade chip to do something else. And they traded bad contract for bad contract. We'll see what Wiggins turns out to be. Well, 2 years later, here we are. Wiggins is incredibly important to this team and is making it so that, yes, Klay doesn't have to put all that pressure on himself, especially defensively, but even offensively, because Wiggins' gravity as a 42% three-point shooter at the moment is helping them immensely too. And I mean, is Andrew Wiggins the most athletic wing they've had this? I mean, I don't want to say this whole run because they had Kevin Durant for a couple of years, but in the non-Durant years, I mean, Wiggins, he's younger Andre Iguodala in that regard, but with a 3-point shot. No offense, Iggy.
Nah, he's been a revelation for that team. One I don't think anyone saw coming. Not this kind of fit with this group. All right, I want to talk about the other side of the spectrum a little bit. In Boston, you've got Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown under a microscope. The Celtics have been uneven all season long. They've had some decent wins. They've had far more horrifying losses. Going into Madison Square Garden, blowing a 25-point lead, losing to zombified versions of the Timberwolves and Clippers. And that's kind of brought the microscope to the 2 top players in Boston, Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Now, obviously, I'm around the Celtics a lot. I do a lot of TV work for NBC Sports Boston in the city. I never understood, Howard, the breakup Tatum and Brown discussion. I never got it. it never was based any kind of fact, right? Like if you want to look at the past, you look at the fact, I'm using that word specifically, that Tatum and Brown as a tandem have been to 2 conference finals in 4 years. Now, you can say, that's not a championship. They didn't get over the hump and get to the finals. All right, well, lots of young players don't do that. But in Jayson Tatum's rookie year, without Kyrie Irving, without Gordon Hayward, they went to the conference finals and they pushed Cleveland to 7 games. And spearheading that attack was Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. In the bubble, I was going to say last year, time is a flat circle at this point. There were 2 championships in 1 year. But in 2020, in the bubble, they went to a conference finals under duress, tough circumstance. They did it with Gordon Hayward sitting out a chunk of time in the playoffs. So, and with Kemba Walker struggling during that stretch. So, the problem in Boston is not Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. The problem in Boston is that those 2 guys don't have, right now, the right pieces around them. Throughout their careers, at least with the Celtics, they have had high-level kind of lead point guards. It was Isaiah Thomas early on, in the case of Jaylen Brown, his first year. Then it was Kyrie Irving when he played there. Then it was Kemba Walker when he had, a year plus of being a part of that team. Now, look, this is not a critique of Marcus Smart, who is an excellent player, but he's a different kind of player. And when I watch the Celtic team, I see a team in need of that kind of offensive-oriented lead guard, because where they get into trouble is late in games, and it just becomes isolation basketball, where the lack of that lead guard type of player, it's glaring. You can tell they're missing it in that rotation. So I think it's nuts. I don't get the debate over trade Jaylen Brown. Like, the other part of it is trade him for who? Like, what are you going to do? Like, I know Michael Pena, our colleague, had a column where he talked about trading him to Atlanta. I'm not really sure that the Kevin Huerter, DeAndre Hunter platter does anything for me, if I'm Boston. The Celtics, if you want to get into a Ben Simmons conversation, you'd say, all right, we'll give you Jaylen Brown. You got to give us Ben Simmons and something else. You got to give us, like, I'm just making it up, like Tyrese Maxey. You got to give us another player in that mix. So I don't see, the option out there that makes sense to giving up a player of Jaylen Brown's caliber. In the month of January, the 5 games he's played, guy's averaging like 30 points a game in this month. His shooting is slowly starting to tick up to those close to 40% level from 3-point range. And I think we'll progressively get there before the end of the season. So I think it's nuts. I understand that when a team is losing, the attention is going to turn to the best players and the can they coexist argument. But all you got to do is watch these games and see, among the Celtics' problems, chemistry between Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum is not at the top of them.
No, I mean, listen, there's 2 different kinds of these situations where you have a couple of young stars and you talk about why you presumably need to break them up. There's, and chemistry, even when we talk about chemistry, there's 2 different kinds of chemistry. There's the personal and then there's the basketball. As a personal matter, there's been no indication to date, correct me if I'm wrong, that these guys have any issues with each other, right? This isn't a Shaq versus Kobe or any other, like, who's control of the team, who's the alpha dog.
Let me jump in on that just to kind of, they're very different people, right? Like, Jaylen Brown is among the more activist players in the NBA. When something social happens out there, Jaylen Brown is ready, if not willing, to weigh in, whereas I think Jayson Tatum is not as comfortable in those situations. So they're very different personality-wise, but I have never, ever, ever heard anything about them not like each other. In fact, Tatum just the other night, came out and had a really good answer to the question of can they coexist. He talked about how they've been reading and seeing what people are saying about them, and they don't buy into it. And that's, like, some people might say, well, that's just, what they're supposed to say. It's, you don't want to criticize your teammate. I believe that. I believe that they think they're fine coexisting. They've just got to figure out how to make it work with everything around them.
Yeah. So that's important to note, right? So there's not a chemistry issue in terms of personalities or in terms of whose team it is, or like they're not at odds with each other. Then there's the question of chemistry as far as like basketball fit. Are their skill sets complementary? Well, they are. They very clearly are. Is there a problem with the taking turns thing at times? Is there a problem with, as you note, lack of playmaking down the stretch of games? Sure, but that's because that's not how either of these guys are built.
Which is kind of a problem, Howard, because like in the absence of Kemba and Kyrie and a lead guard that's more traditional, they needed to be better in the playmaking department, and they have not this year. Like they have not taken that step forward in their games.
And look, I used to have this discussion with people and debate with people all the time when Carmelo and LeBron were younger in their careers, because what separated LeBron from Carmelo over the course of their first 5, 6, 7, 8 years in the league was that LeBron was this consummate playmaker type, and he could score at a very high level too. Carmelo was the more gifted overall scorer at the beginning, right? Carmelo had the natural. That was how they came into the league and how they were viewed. Carmelo was the scorer. LeBron was the orchestrator who could also score. And LeBron just became a dominant scorer who also, was this phenomenal point forward type. And I always thought if Carmelo would just dedicate himself to playmaking a little bit more. And it was just not the way he's made up. And I criticize him for it at times. And I still kind of think at times that Carmelo could have become a better assist guy, a better playmaker in the course of his career, and it would have led to more success with some of his teams. But some guys just aren't built that way. And maybe Tatum and Brown, they're great at what they're great at. Tatum's got this incredible all-around offensive repertoire. Jaylen Brown's a really good scorer and a shooter, and can take on the top defensive assignments. And they're both switchable, and they're athletic. They've got all these other things going for them. They may or may not ever grow into great playmakers. So it's incumbent upon the team, and I've said this before too. I've gone through that same list. They had Isaiah Thomas. They had Kyrie Irving. They had Terry Rozier even once upon a time. They had Gordon Hayward, who, while not a point guard, was a great playmaking forward and a guy who could get a team organized and just create for teammates. They just don't have playmaking. And that's on the front office. That's on Danny Ainge over the course of his last couple of years there for the guys he lost and the guys that he couldn't acquire. That's on Brad Stevens now. And
the playmaking stuff, like as I look at the roster, like Brad Stevens did some pretty smart things in the offseason.
Sure.
Moving off Kemba Walker for Al Horford, when you consider it, they're better off for that. Like Al Horford, while he struggled with his shot, his own is. Yeah, given what we've seen from Kemba, like Al's a better fit for the Celtics team than Kemba would have been in hindsight. Letting Evan Fournier walk. I thought that was a bad idea at the time, even though Fournier keeps coming in and killing the Celtics every time he plays against them. I think that was probably the right move to not give him that contract and to maintain some level of flexibility with somewhere else. Where I think they believed too much that Marcus Smart could be the primary point guard. Like he's great at a lot of things. He is a great perimeter defender. He's kind of a great Swiss Army knife guy, whether it's coming off the bench or starting in multiple different roles. But the Celtics had some interest in Lonzo Ball, this past off season. Like Lonzo eventually got that big offer from Chicago, but the Celtics, I think they were interested. I just don't think they were willing to go all in to kind of figure out a way to make it work, both via sign and trade and with giving Lonzo all that money. I look at this team now, Howard. Lonzo Ball would look really, really good with this Celtic team. A playmaker who just is solely focused on getting the ball to teammates. That's the kind of guy this Celtics team is missing. I mean,
should we bring up Ricky Rubio again? I know he's actually out for the rest of the season with an ACL now, but this is another one of those teams that could have used Ricky Rubio.
Yeah.
And this is the quandary now. No, I don't think if I'm them, I would want to break up Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum, because I think that having two great two-way wings is in today's NBA a great path to being a contender if you have the right players around them. The problem is I don't know how you're going to get the players that you need given where they are. And it's not as though they have, outside of Marcus Smart, a ton of tradable commodities. Now, maybe Marcus Smart is the piece that gets you what you need, but it may well be that they've hemmed themselves so much in with this roster that the only way forward is flipping Jaylen Brown for all the help that Jayson Tatum needs, right? Like I would rather get somebody who is complementing those guys, starting with a point guard, there are other needs as well, but starting with the playmaker, starting with the point guard. But if you can't get there, if you can't find a way through free agency or any other route, and listen, Boston, yes, Al Horford once upon a time chose Boston in free agency, and it broke the long drought of an all-star caliber free agent choosing Boston. And then Gordon Hayward chose them, but that was the Brad Stevens influence, right? At this stage, are we expecting that Boston could just get under the cap, go into free agency, and get a top or second tier point guard or whoever else? Like, I don't know if that's the path. And so I'm not suggesting that they should break up the two of them, but I am saying I do wonder practically how you get the players you need, given that you don't have a whole lot of other assets to deal. I would hate for them to have to do that, to spend Jaylen Brown to fill out the rest of the roster. I do wonder if they have any great alternatives to that.
Well, the problem is a lot of the draft picks haven't really panned out in the last couple of years. Like Romeo Langford hasn't become a consistent starter. Aaron Nesmith right now has been bolted to the bench when he's been healthy. And, that's the difference, really. Like when you hit on these picks, middle of the first round, whatever.
Solves a lot of problems.
That's what makes you ultimately successful. All right, let's talk for a second about the Atlanta Hawks, who are more disappointing than the Celtics, if you can believe that. The Hawks are sitting well under 500. As we record this, they are on the outside of the play-in, currently looking in. The defense is atrocious. You've got the GM, Travis Schlenk, going on local radio and just pummeling them publicly, which was wild.
That was something.
That clip.
That was old school. Let me just say, that was old school. This is the way GMs used to talk before everybody got too much PR training. This is how the league worked back.
What did it start there then? What did you make of Travis Schlenk? He wasn't saying anything we aren't all seeing. Like, I was in Los Angeles over the weekend. I watched the Lakers-Hawks game. It's like, wow, offensively, the Hawks are kind of fun. Trey goes to the basket, throws these lobs. They seem to be in sync there. Then defensively, like, they're just disinterested on that end of the floor, which is wild, considering that they were a legit contender last year.
Yeah. To start with Travis Schlenk's comments, look, I always say this. People in our industry should never criticize players, coaches, GMs, or anybody else for being honest. I want candor. I want honesty. Were there people around the league likely cringing at how honest he was being? Is there a risk there that you're now putting your players in an awkward position? Sure. But yeah, once upon a time, that wasn't unusual. And it was like, well, players, if you don't want that pressure and that spotlight on you, then, perform up to expectations, get your shit together, basically. So I don't have a problem with it at all. Are there potentially some consequences if players took it personally and got into a funk or whatever? Yeah, sure. But I don't think that's the way you're supposed to think about this. And I appreciate, especially when you're going on local radio to talk to your fans, to say, look, I'm disappointed too. I expected better. We all expected better. It hasn't worked out. And maybe that is on me, the GM, for not maybe reshuffling a little bit. That should not be controversial. It's just that we are in such a safe era where everybody is so careful not to say anything wrong, not to offend anybody, especially not offend their star players, lest you piss off their agents and everything else. I appreciate that Travis Schlenk is willing to just say, yeah, this is what it is. I kind of think that we're all overreacting a little bit, maybe including Travis Schlenk. I get that there's pressure there, and he's probably getting it from ownership. But look, the Hawks overachieved last year, folks. They weren't supposed to make the conference finals. They were young and talented and fun and interesting, and we thought if they have a breakthrough year, it meant they'd be the 6th, 7th, 8th seed. Not that they would be, where did they finish? 5th, and then make a run to the conference finals during a weird year of very strange and unusual, unique circumstances. So they overachieved. It's kind of like what we've talked about with the Knicks. That puts a target on your back because now you're expected to exceed what you did the previous season. But neither the Knicks nor the Hawks probably were as good as what they showed last season. And so now they're dealing with the backlash. I think there's a strong case to be made. If you just look at the Hawks roster, Trae Young is 23. Kevin Huerter is 23. Collins is 24. DeAndre Hunter is 24. Cam Reddish is 22. Okongwu is 21. This is a really young team, but a really young, talented, and intriguing team. And if they had just done what we all thought they'd do last year, breakthrough, be a 7th or 8th seed, lose in the first round, then this backsliding, we'd say, that's what happens with young teams, right? A couple steps forward, a step back. Let them evolve. Let them figure it out. maybe they have a little bit too much depth. Maybe it's hard to define roles when you have so many guys who need minutes. But let's sort it out over time. They're young. There's no urgency. The urgency is coming from they made the conference finals and now we expect too much.
Well,
and so
I would say the urgency, yeah, it's kind of coming from there. But it's also, like this time last year, the Hawks started to trend up, right? Like they had a bunch of injuries early on. Lloyd Pierce, it wasn't working. Nate McMillan, he gets hired, and they start to trend. They were trending in a positive direction. Right now, as we sit here at the halfway point, they're not. They're trending in the opposite direction at the moment. And like I go back to something, I'm going to paraphrase him a little bit here, but Trae Young said where he's talking about how it's, the regular season's kind of tough to get up for after, like, it's one playoff run. Like, what are we doing? Like, what are we?
Yeah, you just LeBron. Got here.
Like, LeBron saying that's one thing. Trae Young is entirely different. The mix just feels a little bit off. And it feels like, yeah, could they go on a run before the end of the year? Absolutely. They've got a lot of talent on that team. They've got a couple of guys out, so sure, they can do that. But they need like a defensive identity with this group. And they're not really getting it. Like they played enough defense to get to the conference finals last year, but they still ranked in the bottom third of the NBA in defensive efficiency last season. Now, not 28th like they are now, but they were still, pretty bad last year. I mean, if I'm Travis Schlenk, and we both know he's doing this, like I'm looking around for committed defensive players. There's been a lot of chatter about Ben Simmons. Could they put together a package that interests Philadelphia? Probably. If I'm the Sixers and I get close to the trade deadline, some kind of John Collins, Kevin Huerter package would probably look pretty good to me. Now, we could have a different discussion about how Ben Simmons and Trae Young would fit. That's a little bit more problematic. But, I think you might be able to get Philadelphia's attention as we get closer to February 10th. And I mentioned Boston before. Like, Marcus Smart would look pretty good in a Hawks uniform, backstopping that perimeter defense, which has been atrocious really from the start of the season. Maybe a Huerter something combination could get something done with Smart in Boston. So I think something's got to change. Whether it's a seismic deal, like one that involves Ben Simmons, or a smaller one that involves someone like a Marcus Smart. But there's nothing I've seen, Howard, through 40-ish games that makes me believe like, the Hawks are going to suddenly start playing defense that's going to get them into the middle of the playoff pack again.
Yeah, and I'm just simply saying, let's take the long view. Like, yes, if the goal is get yourself back firmly into the playoff field, get yourself closer to where you were last season, put yourself in a position to still, win a series or two because that's the standard now, then yeah, they might have to make a move. But if I'm taking the long view, given the ages of all these guys, given that the core is all 24 and under, and even some of their veterans are only, mid to late 20s, I do think there's time. Like, you don't have to be a contender or a second round team or a conference finalist this season. You just don't. Now, ownership might have a different opinion than I do, and that's the one that Travis Schlenk needs to listen to. But I think that when you have a group this young, you've got a lot of runway. You've got time. And if you don't make a deal between now and the trade deadline, you let the season evolve how it does, and then you get to the offseason, and you've still got all these same pieces to deal then. And there will always be, whether it's Ben Simmons, who might still be there, frankly, or somebody else, there's always a disgruntled star to go chase. The good news is this team has done a really good job overall of drafting so that they've got, like, this is a nice contrast to Boston, right? Like, the Hawks have hit on almost everybody. So now you've got this really deep young core of guys who, if you want to make a 2 or 3 for 1 deal, you've got the depth and the flexibility to do it. So, all that said, if they could, trade 2 of those guys to get Ben Simmons, or like, sorry, Michael Pena, I don't buy the Jaylen Brown trade that you proposed last week online and in the podcast. I don't think the Celtics would be getting nearly
enough. You're trying to offload your depth onto Boston for their good player, which I don't.
Yes,
I just can't see the Celtics going for it. I can't.
I mean, it would take more. I think it would take more, and I think it would take more to get obviously Ben Simmons too. The quick thing on Ben Simmons is this: I don't think that Ben Simmons' next stop should be with him as a primary playmaker. He is a great playmaker, and you don't want to take the ball out of his hands entirely, but he could be more of the Draymond Green type, where you have a traditional point guard, but depending on the situation, whether it's in the half court or even in transition, because Simmons is a great half court or a great transition playmaker. He can be that. I just, I don't worry about his fit with, say, Damian Lillard, which was the one we were talking about months ago, or with Trae Young, because I think his best role is not to have the ball in his hands all the time, because as a non-shooter, that makes it difficult for the rest of the offense to function. So I think having a Trae Young and other great shooters around Ben Simmons and having him be the secondary playmaker and at times primary playmaker, and at times they'll be playing, one or the other. You can alternate them as the two. I don't think that's a problem, is the point. I think you could get Ben Simmons and all the great defense that comes with him and all of his other assets, and then you've still got one of the great shooters running the team with Trae Young.
So let's expand on that for a minute as our last topic here. We're now, as we said, a month to go until the trade deadline. I had a few people ask me some version of this question for my mailbag column that's up on SI.com right now about, what's the future of Ben Simmons? Like, are the Sixers going to find a home for him before February 10th? And if they don't, is he going to be back playing for Philadelphia before the end of the year? I have no confidence, Howard, that Simmons will ever play for the Sixers again. Like, we're now halfway through the season, and it's all quiet when it comes to that. There was some chatter around Christmas time about the Sixers ratcheting up discussions. That dissipated very quickly in the aftermath of the holiday, and now here we are. I don't know what the finances are with Ben Simmons, if the Sixers are paying him full salary, if there's any kind of penalty for him just sitting out. He's clearly still talking about his mental health, or that still remains an issue that lingers with Ben Simmons. But I don't believe he's going to play for Philadelphia. And every day that passes, every week that passes, that makes me more sure it's not going to happen. The question I have, and other teams that I've talked to have about Philadelphia, is are they going to scale down their demands as we get closer to February 10th? Right now, as we record this, teams that have talked to Philly have been told in no uncertain terms that, if you want Simmons, you got to come with that Godfather offer we were looking for 2 months ago, 3 months ago, whatever it was when this whole, saga initially started. Teams aren't going to do that right now. I don't even know what that offer would look like, but there is, I don't call it an expectation, but hope amongst some teams that like Ben Simmons that the Sixers will come down and they'll accept 70 cents on the dollar for this guy, which quite frankly might be the best way to go. Like we mentioned Atlanta, like if they come to the table with a John Collins, Kevin Huerter deal, like don't you take that? Like, or don't you, negotiate a little bit, I guess, but isn't that enough in exchange for a player who's not playing for you and is not going to play for you? Like the idea, Howard, that the Sixers will let this go for the entire season, even though Daryl Morey has come out and said as much, I don't know if I buy that. I don't know that the Sixers, given how well Joel Embiid is playing, he's playing at an MVP level right now, like I don't know if they're going to be willing to sacrifice a year like this where they don't advance deep in the playoffs because they don't have Ben Simmons and they don't have what they could get for him in a trade. So, listen, I think if the Sixers were dragging, right? If they were, losing games and struggling to stay in the playoff field and in a general just state of whatever, dysfunction, disrepair, bad mood, everything, then yeah, the rest of the league could say, aha, he's going to have to come down. Daryl Morey's going to have to come down. They've won 7 in a row as we record this podcast, and 8 of their last 9. And not necessarily a murderer's row of opponents in there, but they did win at Brooklyn in that stretch. They won at Boston not long ago. But doesn't that make the argument for doing something? Like,
well, I'm saying it makes them not desperate. Like the Simmons situation has not dragged them down. If the worst case scenario for the Sixers and the best case scenario for the league that's trying to poach Simmons for as little as possible, that best case scenario was that the Sixers would fall on their faces, and it hasn't happened. They're, as we sit here right now, again, 4 games out of first. They're in 5th place, a game behind the defending champion Milwaukee Bucks. The Sixers are not suffering for this situation.
They're not suffering, Howard. They're not suffering, but they're also, like, I don't think, when we talked earlier about tiers in the NBA, do you put the Sixers in that first tier?
No, I don't. And they would be if Simmons were around.
And if they got something for him, like if they got John Collins and Kevin Huerter, I'm not saying those guys are as good as Ben Simmons, but you'd have to put them in the mix to come out of the Eastern Conference.
Sure. And look, Joel Embiid's carrying a huge load. He's playing like an MVP candidate again. And, there's you could spin that either way too. He needs more help, all that stuff. I'm just saying there's nothing that has happened is making the Sixers feel more desperate to make a deal. They're in a pretty strong position, I think, overall in the standings, which makes, I think, them have a stronger position at the negotiating table. And if Daryl Morey's taken it this far without caving and selling Simmons for 70 cents on the dollar, I don't see why he's going to change now in the next 4 weeks. I agree with you. I don't think Ben Simmons is coming back to the Sixers. If he's come this far without caving, he's not changing his mind either. I still don't understand why he's doing what he's doing. I still don't think it's justified. I don't think it's wise.
And what would he be, by the way? Like, if he came back, like I don't think he's practicing with the team on a regular basis. Like, he will have not played basketball since what, May?
It would be super strange.
Like, I don't know what he can contribute. I mean, he would be able to contribute, obviously, he'd contribute something, but I don't think he'd be the all-star version that we saw. Not this season. Like, I just think it's probably too late for him to get all that back before the end of the year.
Yeah, I agree. But look, the trade presents issues as well on that, right? Like we've all talked about this ad nauseum over the years. The Pistons picking up Rasheed Wallace at the trade deadline in 2004, I think, is the last time a team acquired like a major piece and went and won the championship in the same season. I mean, it's really hard to integrate big pieces and make a deep title run or a deep playoff run. So yeah, they could trade Ben Simmons for whatever package they're going to get. You do that right now, integrating those guys in what will at that time be less than half a season left probably, and trying to make a deep run, you're probably going to fall short anyway because chemistry won't quite have been established, and you'll talk about, well, we just need a training camp together. So, either way, you're probably talking about this not being a title contention season for the Sixers.
Yeah, that's funny. It's funny, though, like, you and I take a different viewpoint of this. Like, you look at the Sixers saying they're playing well, they're not desperate. That's you're not going to get them to just do a deal just to get out of this Ben Simmons situation. I look at it and I see a team that with a couple of tweaks has a chance to win a championship this year. And I understand the argument of like, well, Joel Embiid is still a young guy. Seth Curry is still a young guy. Tyrese Maxey, give him a couple more years, he is going to be even better and all that. But you know what? I heard that about Boston, too, for years, like, and how good they were going to be for years to come. Like, it's, look at all these things change in the NBA. Joel Embiid's got a history of injuries. It has been a long time since he's had a serious one, but you never know with a guy like that. Like, if you see an opportunity, not just to trade Simmons for, like, guys who are only going to be around for 1 year, but Collins, like, say, use Atlanta. Collins under contract for a while. Kevin Huerter's under contract for a while. Let's say you can look to Sacramento. You can make a deal that involves Buddy Hield and something else within the Kings. Like, I feel like there could be a missed opportunity here for Philadelphia if they don't add talent to this mix, whether it's Ben Simmons, which is less likely, or whatever you can get for Ben Simmons.
Yeah, I mean, look, I in an ideal world, yes, either Ben Simmons comes back, not going to happen, or you trade him sooner than later to get whatever that new complementary cast is to help Joel Embiid chase titles. Of course, I still think your primary goal, the responsibility is to get the best possible deal. And I don't think that necessarily means, the star and the moons and the sun and everything. I just think it means you don't, if all you're getting are 70 cents on the dollar deals, you hold out. Because Ben Simmons is that good. The league knows he's that good. And, you can only spend that chip once. So I get it. Don't make a bad deal. I mean, whether the deal is a home run or a triple, whatever, we can make, that we'll know it when we see it, right? But even when you make that deal, I don't know that it necessarily makes you a contender immediately because you're going to have to integrate all those guys anyway.
Yeah. No, there's no easy decision when it comes to this, but I hate to see it. I hate to see Philadelphia waste a year like this of Joel Embiid and a team that looks like it could be a legit contender in Eastern Conference. Howard, good stuff, man. We will do this again next week.
Always a pleasure, my friend.